I'm going to try and remain balanced when speaking about this game. Anyone who's watched my channel for a good period before knows I'm a Manchester United fan, knows I have a love for the club deep rooted from my time as a kid, where we were successful, to now as an adult, when it's not been as fun, but we've still had some moments to celebrate. And I'm not a fan that demands success the way that certain fans do. I actually find it a bit grating when you hear United fans going, we need to win, we need to constantly be winning titles. Sometimes that's just not realistic, and there's 5 or 6 teams in the English Premier League that should be thinking the exact same. I've seen my team win more than most fans will ever see in their lifetime. I can cope without seeing us win another trophy for the rest of my life. I've seen more than most fans ever see. I just want a team that I can vibe with a bit. I can go to games and enjoy watching. I go to every game at home near enough and most aways. And watching this, I try not to swear on these, and I'm going to try and stick to that as best as possible, because I am emotional, even a day later. I even tried to give myself a day to sort of calm down and speak about this. But performance-wise, it's so pathetic. So pathetic. And there isn't an easy, like, I'm done thinking of the easy fix, to be honest. Do you change the manager? Do you sign another 11 players to replace this lot? I don't know at this point. I don't know, because nothing works. Nothing works, and we're still just as crap as we were, no matter how much money we spend, no matter who's in the dugout. And I'm not trying to, blame a culture or blame something to do in the background, because I've done that. I've done that with the Glazers. I've done that with Ed Woodward. I've done that with the recruitment. And everyone came into this season thinking, all right, we have a new structure. We have this better footballing idea now that we can move forward. And that change wasn't going to go dramatically in one transfer window. Surely with this idea of a new culture, that's going to take about 3-4 transfer windows to really start seeing something develop. So I'm not trying to sound impatient, but when you spend the money we've spent, and Ten Hag has spent a lot of money, there has to be results. You can't acceptably lose to Tottenham at home 3-0, to Liverpool at home 3-0, and just write that off. You cannot do it. I don't care what your excuse is. I don't care. Like, Ten Hag could hide behind last season. Despite last season, as much as the FA Cup was fantastic, we were getting battered every game. 30 shots every game. Unacceptably. He can hide behind injuries all he wants last season. It still wasn't acceptable, in my opinion, but he had that as an excuse. He had the idea that it was a chaos behind him. Everyone has been speaking about how much more settled we are in the backdrop, and Luke Shaw's our only real absentee, and he spent money on bringing in Mazraoui. So we've signed a mate of yours, Eric. I'm not having that Luke Shaw would make this dramatic change. You live and die by your choices. You've got your entire Ajax back line, and we play like Stockport. It's unbelievable. Don't start moaning about being backed or not being backed. It's pathetic. I'm already going off on a rant. I'm going to try and get to analysing the game. I usually try and remain impartial and balanced, but I'm so sick of this team at the minute. I'm going to go over United in possession first. So United would alternate between build-up patterns. You'd see it now in the 2-4-4, or you'd see Kobbie Mainoo moving up into the left-hand side, Xerxes playing as the more orthodox striker, and Dalot would invert from left-back. And while I appreciate there feels like a bit more of an attempt at balance with this team, you have to have those deeper players in a possession-based system, comfortable receiving the ball on the half-turn with their back to play, dealing with it under pressure. They've got to be able to resist it to a degree, get the ball up the pitch. And when you look at that Tottenham midfield, they press high. We know how Andrew's going to set up. We know what he's going to do. Nothing he did on Sunday should have surprised anyone. But you look at Maddison, Kulusevski and Bentancur in the midfield, you think, you can get at that. That's a good midfield, but you can get at that. They're going to leave space. They're going to leave points where you can move either side of Kulusevski or Maddison. They're not going to be completely switched on all the time because they are attack-minded players. And I think Bentancur's a fantastic player. I think he's been really underrated in his time at Spurs. He's had a massive injury, which hasn't helped things. But you get players in and around Bentancur, then you're going to catch him out because Kulusevski and Maddison maybe won't give him that protection that a Basuma would, that a Sarr would. Neither Dalot nor Ugarte looked comfortable receiving the ball and trying to progress it up the pitch. They aren't comfortable. Sometimes you get Mainoo dropping in, who would add a little bit more quality. But again, we're relying on a 19-year-old. I mean, this lad, he still has a bedtime, and we're expecting him to carry the technical burden of our midfield. Casemiro has been a bit of a nightmare of a signing. Christian Eriksen does offer technical quality, and he has been playing well in those few games. But there's trade-offs to Eriksen. What he gives you on the ball, you have to sacrifice of what he doesn't give you on the ball. And so we almost have so many players that are just so one-dimensional. They have like one specific role within a team that they can give you a good amount of quality. But to balance out across a whole 90 minutes, none of these players seem to have a collective bit of quality to get you through a game. And so they do that to try and offer balance. Rashford and Garnacho don't get involved in the build-up. They're high and wide. Xerxes can drop in to spread Fernandes and Mainu out wider to maybe receive passing angles. Not that you'd notice because it never really happened and we never really tried to play through. And Spurs, to their credit, they pressed well, aggressively, as we know they'll want to do. If it was in the back four and Dalot was out here and Mainu dropped in, they'd press as the four. And you'd get Solanke going in between the two centre-backs to try and close him down. He'd maybe shadow one. Let's say if Onana passed the ball to Martinez, he'd shadow De Ligt to go and press Martinez and force Martinez into making a decision where he'd have to punt it upfield. Or there would maybe be times where Johnson sniffed a chance to press and he'd go up to Martinez, encouraging Pedro Porro to back him up onto Dalot, Romero switching across. So Spurs had a plan A and a plan B, just like any real good club should. The times where Dalot would invert into midfield, it was a lot easier, I think, for Spurs to press because Kulusevski could move onto Dalot, Maddison onto Agart, Werner onto Mazraoui. Johnson could then come around to Martinez and Solanke could go solely on De Ligt and press him, which again, United's main method of attack was try and play out from the back, try and find openings, wasn't anything on. Pass back to Onana and he could go long to Rashford and go long to Garnacho. And to be fair, I'll give Onana credit. Some of his passing was really good and he did manage to find Rashford in space, did manage to find Garnacho in space. And that's because Spurs give you space to play with him behind. You know, we know how aggressive Spurs are with the high line and they will just give you chances. That is just a fact. And with Van de Ven, you give yourself the best possible chance because his recovery pace is obscene, and in terms of high line defending, he's world class. Romero is I don't think Romero's having a fantastic season, but he is a good defender and a good complement to Van de Ven. And that was the only thing Spurs real had to worry about. If they just pressed, it didn't even have to be an aggressive press, just you could go through the motions and catch this United team out. But if that back four could just be ready to drop when the time comes, then they could stop United's main attacking threat. And United did get through a few times in the first half on that left-hand side. Rashford found a few good balls to Garnacho. My biggest issue was Xerxes, and I feel a bit bad for Xerxes because I think he's been horrifically miscast. What he was brought in to do, you have to question the recruitment team on, because he drops deep. He's very lacking in mobility. He's not amazing with his movement. He's a bit clunky, and you look at his frame and you think he's a massive lad. You can see it. So he'll drop in to maybe find a pass from Onana or from one of the midfielders to help try and outnumber midfield's press. And you get Rashford and it's been Ahmad. And Garnacho suffers from this on the right-hand side because he's on his right foot. They stay so wide. And they're obviously doing that through instruction to maintain width. But when you have your striker dropping deep to receive the ball in these areas, then you have Rashford and Garnacho spreading wide high. Nobody's attacking that centre area. Who's in this area? The only time we had a bit of penetration on that front was when Garnacho was on the left-hand side against Palace, and he was making those out-to-win runs in between full-back and centre-back. And Xerxes found him with a good few passes, and there was a bit of balance to the play, and Garnacho should have had a couple goals at the end of that game. So there was something building there. But then that's the only time we've seen him on the left-hand side. I'm going to try not to be harsh, because Rashford is the one player that probably gets criticised more than most in this team. And I know there's an aspect that he does get defended by his mates in the media, which that is true, and it's a bit of a double-edged sword. It's either all or nothing, it feels like, with Rashford, but he's got to offer more. He's got to offer more. He's so predictable. He's so one-dimensional. He's so unwilling to take on anyone. And we'll get onto the off-the-ball stuff, and that's going to fry my head just as much as this. And it's confidence, and it's enjoyment of the game. And you look at Rashford, and I just think, this can't be fun for you. You do not look like you're having you look miserable. Like, you just look so devoid of any enjoyment or love for a game, love for a place that you were born in Withershore. That's 5 minutes away from the stadium for people who don't know Manchester geography. That is as Manchester as it gets in Withenshaw. And you do not look like you embody anything about what it is to be a Manchester United fan or player at this point in time. Risk, excitement, getting people on the edge of your seat. You look lost. You look lost, lad. And so to talk about an attacking shape where Spurs were pinned back, there wasn't one. There wasn't one realistically. And even sometimes we could get these overloads in between the lines. Bentancur would mark well and move between markers. Van de Ven would come out and engage if he needed to, and Romero would as well, to try and just stem the flow of that attack as it happened. And again, because of the wide nature of the wingers, sometimes United just didn't have that out ball because they weren't willing to attack any space that would be left in behind. And I don't want to go too critical on United. Obviously, I have emotional ties to United, so I'm going to That's going to be my focus. Spurs were fantastic, and I think Spurs have been really good all season. They just haven't gotten the points on the board that they deserve. This game, they more than made up. They should have had more. Onana pulls off a few good saves. But we're going to go on to Spurs' on the ball shape and how that transpired. God, I can feel myself getting heated already talking about this. This is mental. United's press was the most pathetic thing I've ever seen. So we've seen them work well, actually, with the 4-4-2 and the 4-2-4. There was the game against City in the cup final where it was pulled off excellently, where one of the players, Xerxes, would drop onto the holding midfielder. Bruno Fernandes would go and press the player on the ball if it was Van der Ven. He'd probably look for the pass to Romero. Xerxes would move across the press and Bruno Fernandes would cover on Bentancur. And to be fair, I think Bruno Fernandes and Mason Mount worked really well as a pressing duo. They played off each other well on the ball and off the ball. I'm not seeing it with Xerxes and Bruno. I've got to be honest. There doesn't seem to be any real chemistry on or off the ball. They don't look like they're working well with each other. I don't know if there's maybe a language barrier. I don't actually know if Xerxes speaks any English whatsoever. I've never heard him in an interview. And the amount of easy balls Bentancur could receive from the centre-backs to play through was silly. Forget being ripped apart by midfield overloads. That's your first line. That should be the easiest part of the game, because you should be setting up in a shape to prevent the standard build-up of a team to whatever their designated build-up pattern is. And for a lot of teams, it is just as simple as playing to the holding midfielder or the single pivot. That should be the easiest part. It's how they adapt to that is what should cause you the issue. And so United, it felt like at points would react. Xerxes and Bruno would get nowhere near Bentancur. This would cause Mainu to react and try and press Bentancur. And you look at that and think, okay, 3-on-3, that's not too bad. But what was the issue of this? Well, if you look at it, it's left 3-on-4 for United in that midfield. Ugarte, Rashford and Garnacho in between the two fullbacks, who invert into midfield, as we know, and Kulusevski and Maddison. So if that Manchester United front press could be beaten, there was options to play through galore. Another one was Maddison could drop into this area here, pushing a doggy into the left half space to receive the ball from deep. And Maddison is fantastic technically in those deeper build-up phases to get on the ball and help progress it. Once he received the ball in these positions, there was no trigger to go and press. There was no real option to go and press because United didn't have the men available. And the wide players of Johnson and Werner could pin back the fullbacks. And this is another way that they would help play out is, let's say with Maddison dropping into this position here, there was a clean little pass. If Bentancur could free himself from Mainu to find this angle, a doggy would move inside, maybe dragging Rashford in a little bit more narrow, and Werner would drop into this space here, dragging Mazraoui close to him. And I'm not going to be too critical on Mazraoui because he's had a really good start for Manchester United, and I quite like him. I think he's technically very neat, and he offers a bit of balance in the fact he can play both sides of fullback, and he offers a lot of balance in the sense that he can play roles, multiple roles in a team. A right-sided centre-back in possession, he can invert into midfield, he can play higher up, and he's done all of that for United so far. But he was getting pulled in so tight to Werner, who could just turn him and run into the space in behind, or a doggy or Maddison can make this run with dragging Rashford in, or Ugarte or Mainu, and Werner could just attack through the middle of the pitch and set up Solanke. And Jamie Carragher pointed out on punditry on Monday Night Football about how De Ligt was caught narrow and leaving so much space between Mazraoui. I understand his point, and he is right, but I've noticed that between football teams up and down Europe over the last little while, over the last few years, centre-backs do that. I don't know what that is, but it is seemingly instructions from managers, and it does feel a bit meta. So as much as it is an error, that does seemingly happen. I think managers are pretty obsessed with centre-back partnerships taking care of a striker. Is Solanke that type of striker that you need to do that with? Maybe not. And the issue with that is when you do that with De Ligt and Martinez as well, despite the fact that Spurs never really built up on that right-hand side, is that De Ligt doesn't have the mobility to cover this area of the pitch. So once Mazraoui was beaten, as he was a number of times, watching De Ligt try and cover that space was painful. He doesn't have the legs, he doesn't have the sprint speed, he doesn't have the burst. It's not his game. And even if Bentancur wasn't being marked by Mainu, if Mainu was still in, then you'd still get a level of outnumbering in that Manchester United midfield, because let's say Rashford would get caught in narrow to Ugarte, Mainu here, Garnacho coming in, trying to keep tabs on that Spurs sort of attacking forward, the eights and the fullbacks who would invert. I actually feel like, and I've given Ange a bit of slating for this in the past, multiple times, about how he doesn't use width a lot in the build-up. With Maddison dropping in here, with a doggy sometimes pulling in, they were stretching that United midfield. They were creating width, and that United midfield tried to play narrow. Bentancur would drop in as well, so that would give an automatic 4-on-5 for Manchester United that became an issue. And I also think Solanke did a fantastic job of dropping in to be an extra man. Sometimes he'd be engaged by Martinez, sometimes he wouldn't. And so if they could beat that early level of press, which again, to describe it as a press is a joke amongst teams who set up defences across up and down the country, even at Sunday League level, then you're dealing with this. If Mainu comes and reacts to Bentancur, that leaves Kulusevski free. If Garnacho comes in and reacts to Kulusevski, that leaves Pedro Porro free. And then all of a sudden he can run at the defence. And Spurs have got a very good team that are very capable of interchanging and remaining really tactically and technically confident in most areas of the pitch, and especially in those middle zones. Whether it's out wide, it's in the half space, it's central. So rotations and the fluidity that they could use to rip United apart were used to great effect. Again, I'm going to give Ugarte a bit of sympathy. I thought he had a nightmare. He looks like he needs to adapt to the pace of the English game, and he looks like he needs to do it quick. But that isn't his fault that he's been hired into this team, and he needs a settling in period. You should have to accept that. He just looks like he's willing to dive into everything. He just looks far too headless chicken at points. And I feel like that team needs a sitter. He's the extreme example because these players aren't available. But Rodri, just someone to keep control, someone to organise, someone to... I feel like Mainu needs someone to play him like a video game. You need someone that has him on a controller to just sort of instruct him where to go, and he can pick up the slack. And it felt like Ugarte needed that, and they're both just reacting to plays that are available, and they felt lost. They felt really lost. And another issue with this United team, when they do that, is they're so unathletic. They have no legs. They can't run. It's such an unathletic team. It's not even true. From back line to midfield to forward lines, there is no real legs in this United midfield. Watching them try and cover space is painful. Like, you see lads sink pints at Saturday night to turn up half cut to a Sunday League game, and they look capable of running. They look at least capable of going to being aggressive and closing down their man. It looks hilarious. It looks like it shouldn't exist. It's basically a unicorn. But we're still talking fundamental basics of the game that United just don't have. And if you don't have that mobility, which fair enough, City are so successful and they've not always had the most mobile of squads, but cover yourself. Don't be so stupid in going to engage in thoughtless periods and thoughtless zones where then you're going to have to cover space in behind you. You're going to rely on your mate to cover space, and none of you are comfortable doing that. And that's got to come from the manager. That's got to come from a manager identifying strengths and weaknesses of a squad, and that if you don't have the mobility to cover space, restrict it. Be compact, vertically, horizontally. The run where Van de Ven just cuts through the entire United midfield and defence in that left half space, in between De Ligt and Mazraoui, in between Ugarte and I don't know why Rashford's over on this right-hand side, and in between Garnacho and Ugarte, just running through like a knife through butter. It's the perfect example of this, and nobody can get near him. Nobody can get anywhere near him. And he's run about 70 yards with the ball. It's mental. I'm going to end this video here now because I didn't want to get angry doing this. I really didn't. And Ten Hag has to sort this out. I don't think any United manager's career is going to be dictated by the Europa League. It would be horrific if he got knocked out in this group stage when 24 teams can go through or whatever it is. But if we were third in the league and we got knocked out in the Europa League, I don't think people would really care that much. That Villa game on Sunday is huge. And I'm sure I'll be analysing that game. And I'll be interested to see what I'll feel come the end of it. But there we go. I hope you guys enjoyed this therapy session. Maybe it helped some of you guys. I don't know. Maybe we can bond over our trauma together. And I'll like the video if you liked it. Dislike it if you disliked it. Comment down below and tell me why either way. Subscribe if you want to see more. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye for now, lads.